May 2, 2001, in Chevy Chase, Maryland, an ordinary suburban morning was shattered. A mother was found dead in her own home. For years, the case went cold, evidence left frozen, and hope dwindling. Breakthroughs in forensic science changed everything. Decades-old DNA and advanced genealogy went beyond the reach of any alibi, and new analysis reopened the investigation. They did not just solve one case, they exposed secrets buried across rural farmhouses and lonely highways. The question is, how did modern forensics finally deliver the answers families had been denied for decades? Chevy Chase, Maryland, in 2001, was the kind of place where neighbors waved from driveways and kids played on quiet streets. The Preer family lived at 4800 Drummond Avenue, a brick colonial just outside Washington, D.C. On the morning of May 2, 2001, Leslie Preer's absence from work set off alarm bells among friends and colleagues. When officers entered the home, they found her in the foyer. The scene showed clear signs of a violent struggle, overturned furniture, scattered belongings, and evidence that someone had tried to clean up. An autopsy later revealed that Leslie had been strangled and struck repeatedly, her head battered against the tile floor. These details, recorded in the initial police and medical examiners' reports, pointed to a sustained and personal attack. From the start, investigators focused close to home. Leslie's husband, Sandy, became the subject of intense scrutiny. The pressure fractured the family, and suspicion lingered for years. Sandy lived under a shadow until his death in 2017, never cleared by a public resolution. Family members would later speak about the burden of those years, their grief compounded by the constant question of whether one of their own was responsible. What the Preers did not know was that the most important witness to Leslie's murder was hidden in the evidence freezer. In 2001, detectives collected bloodstains, fingernail scrapings, and other biological traces from the foyer and nearby rooms. Advances in DNA technology were just beginning to reshape forensic work, but the science still had limits. The samples were carefully packaged and logged, then stored in cold conditions, preserved against the possibility that future technology might find answers no one could reach at the time. The original investigation ran into a wall. DNA testing excluded Sandy Preer as the source of male DNA found under Leslie's fingernails and in blood at the scene, but it did not point investigators toward a new suspect. The crime scene evidence, meticulously labeled and frozen, waited as the years passed, untouched by the rapid progress happening in forensic labs across the country. By 2021, the case remained cold. The Preer family had only memories and unanswered questions. Yet, in a locked evidence room, the biological samples from that May morning were still intact, protected by the protocols of a department that refused to close the door on justice. The decision to freeze and preserve those items would prove to be the turning point, setting the stage for a new kind of investigation that would reach far beyond the tools available in 2001. In September 2022, the preserved blood evidence from the Preer home was sent to a specialized laboratory for forensic genetic genealogy analysis. This was not a simple database search. Analysts generated a dense single nucleotide polymorphism profile from the decades-old blood and uploaded it to public genealogy databases, scanning for distant relatives. The breakthrough came when the search uncovered a genetic link to a relative in Romania, a thread impossible to find through traditional methods. Genealogists mapped family trees, tracing connections between the Romanian match and families who had settled in the United States. The name Eugene Gligor surfaced. He had once dated Leslie Preer's daughter Lauren years before the murder. That connection, buried in old case files, now took on new weight. Detectives needed certainty. On June 9, 2024, investigators watched as Gligor discarded a water bottle. The bottle was collected and sent for a short tandem repeat DNA comparison against the crime scene evidence. The lab report left no doubt. The DNA from the water bottle matched the male DNA found under Leslie's fingernails and in blood at the scene. That confirmation led to Gligor's arrest in Washington, D.C. a week later. He faced a first-degree murder charge, but prosecutors found no evidence of premeditation. In May 2024, Gligor pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The case reached its final chapter in a Montgomery County courtroom on August 28, 2025. Family members filled the benches, some clutching photographs of Leslie. 6 relatives spoke, describing years of grief and suspicion. Lauren Preer, her voice shaking, called Gligor a wolf in sheep's clothing. She spoke about the pain of losing her mother and the added torment of watching her father live under suspicion until his death in 2017. The prosecution pushed for the maximum 30-year sentence, arguing that Gligor's brutality and his efforts to clean up the scene deserved the harshest penalty. The defense urged leniency, citing Gligor's history of addiction and trauma. The judge handed down a 22-year sentence, longer than the state guidelines but short of the maximum, plus 5 years of supervised probation. In his statement to the court, Gligor said, "I vaguely remember leaving the Preer house in the morning, but the rest is a blur. I know Lauren and Leslie's family want to know why I was there and what happened. I'm sorry. I'm unable to remember and provide an explanation." He added that he hoped to be of service to the family, though his words rang hollow in a room shaped by loss. For the Preers, the resolution brought a measure of closure, ending 2 decades of uncertainty with answers only science could provide. In rural Iowa, after the winter of 1983, the Novak farmhouse sat silent, but the evidence inside spoke volumes. Deputies collected 2 hammers, a bent golf club, a chunk of firewood, and Ronald Novak's clothing, each piece logged by hand and sealed in paper bags. The socks, stained and torn, were entered onto property sheets alongside the suspected weapons. At the Lynn County Sheriff's Office, a single evidence clerk managed the property room, working with handwritten logs and a locked steel cabinet. Her routine was methodical, every item sealed, every entry dated, every transfer initialed. Paper packaging was a deliberate choice. Unlike plastic, it let blood and other biological traces dry out, slowing the decay that ruins DNA. The socks and weapons, air-dried and wrapped, sat in a dark, rarely heated corner of the property room. Over the years, the clerk checked seals and updated logs whenever a detective or technician needed access. Each movement left a trace, initials, dates, storage locations on the property sheets. When the office upgraded its storage in the late 1990s, older evidence moved to a temperature-stable vault. The socks, hammers, and golf clubs stayed untouched, still in the same paper and tape from 1983. Detectives came and went. The original investigators left behind scene sketches, chain of custody forms, and lab submission sheets, all tucked into manila folders. Early lab reports offered only basic serology, blood types, and enzyme markers, inconclusive answers. DNA testing was still years away, but the evidence clerk kept every item, aware that future science might find what old technology could not. By the early 2000s, the evidence vault held hundreds of cold case items. Novak's socks and the battered hammers waited, their packaging yellowed but intact. The sheriff's office faced the same limits as many rural agencies: tight space, aging records, a small staff. Yet the discipline of logging each artifact, maintaining ambient storage, and resisting shortcuts preserved what mattered. The property sheets from May 1983 listed every artifact by hand, noting date, initials, and storage, a paper trail that would one day prove essential. When the call came to test these items for DNA, the socks and weapons were still sealed as they had been decades before. Quiet diligence, and careful record-keeping had preserved the evidence, leaving the chain of custody unbroken and ready for science to finally catch up. In the spring of 2011, nearly 3 decades after Ronald Novak was found dead in his rural Iowa farmhouse, investigators at the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation Crime Lab opened the evidence packages for another look. The socks Novak wore that night, sealed in paper since 1983, still held biological traces. Using a modern STR kit, lab scientists extracted a partial male DNA profile, one that belonged to someone other than Novak. The result was promising but incomplete, not enough for a direct database match. The case file grew thicker, and the evidence returned to storage, waiting for technology to catch up. By 2019, the state lab had access to more sensitive STR profiling kits capable of analyzing degraded or low-quantity DNA. This time, analysts targeted the same socks and a claw hammer collected from the scene. Using a 20-locus STR panel, they generated a full DNA profile from the biological material on the socks. The difference was immediate. The new profile was robust, covering all core loci required for entry into CODIS, the National DNA Database. The odds of a coincidental match were astronomical. The profile was unique to a single individual in the population. The lab's CODIS administrator uploaded the profile. Within days, a hit returned. The database identified a man living out of state whose DNA had been entered for a prior felony. The match was confirmed by independent retesting. For the first time, detectives had a name linked by science, not speculation. The Iowa State Lab director described the moment as a breakthrough built on years of preservation and patience. The chain of custody, paper bags, hand-logged transfers, temperature-controlled storage had kept the evidence viable for just this moment. Detectives traveled to Oregon, working with local authorities to collect a reference sample from the identified man. The sample was processed using the same STR kit, and the results were conclusive. The DNA from the sock and the hammer matched the reference sample at every locus. The probability of the match occurring by chance was calculated at 1 in 650 trillion. Lab analysts prepared their reports, and the arrest warrant was issued. Sheriff's deputies, accompanied by the state lab director and the lead detective, made the arrest. The news reached Lynn County. After more than 40 years, the case had a suspect in custody. The science had delivered what decades of interviews and leads could not, a direct link from the evidence to the accused. For the investigators, the resolution was both technical and deeply personal, closing a chapter that had haunted the department for a generation. A stretch of highway in Douglas County, Colorado, can be unforgiving. In April 1987, the wind pressed hard against the roadside grass, scattering dust across the pavement. The body of Rhonda Marie Fisher was discovered near a ditch, exposed to the elements and miles from the nearest town. The scene offered few clues. Rain had already washed away footprints, and sunlight had begun to break down whatever traces might have been left behind. For investigators, the outdoor setting posed a challenge from the start. Every hour in the open meant more risk that critical evidence could be lost to weather, animals, or time. The medical examiner's technician arrived with a simple but essential tool, a pair of brown paper bags. Following protocol, she slipped one bag over each of Rhonda's hands before transport. This old-school safeguard aimed to protect any trace evidence, fibers, hairs, or biological material that might still be clinging to the victim's fingers. Paper, not plastic, was chosen for a reason. Plastic can trap moisture and foster bacteria, accelerating the breakdown of DNA. Paper allows air to circulate, keeping the evidence dry and slowing decay. The bags, each labeled with the date and time, were logged as evidence later that same day in April 1987. At the morgue, the coroner's minutes recorded every step. The bags were carefully removed and sealed in new envelopes, then stored in the property room. Technicians collected fingernail clippings, swabs from the skin, and samples from clothing. Some items were sent for immediate testing, but others, like the bags that had covered the hands, were set aside, untested. In the late 1980s, forensic labs faced limits. DNA analysis was new, expensive, and often reserved for blood or obvious biological stains. Trace evidence from skin or paper rarely made it to the priority list. Those bags, along with several other items, joined a growing shelf of unsolved case evidence, preserved but overlooked. The risk of degradation in an outdoor case like this was high. Heat, moisture, and ultraviolet light can break down DNA in a matter of days. Even the best storage practices could not fully reverse what had already happened at the scene. But the decision to use paper, to log and store every item, even those not immediately tested, meant that decades later there would still be a chance. The property room's inventory from April 1987 lists the bags that had covered the hands and several other items, all sealed and untouched, waiting for technology to catch up. For Rhonda Fisher's case, the overlooked and the untested would become the last hope for answers, setting the stage for advanced laboratory methods that would finally be able to read what the environment and time had tried to erase. In early 2023, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation's Next Generation Sequencing Lab received evidence from the Douglas County property room. Paper bags sealed since 1987 still carried faint traces that decades of traditional testing had left untouched. Technicians used a high-density SNP array, scanning over 600,000 points across the genome. The result was a digital DNA profile robust enough for modern genealogy searches, even from material that had been preserved through years of heat, cold, and humidity. With the SNP data in hand, a forensic genealogy analyst uploaded the profile to GEDmatch Pro, a public database that allows law enforcement access only when users have opted in. The search returned a single, promising connection: an individual sharing 87 centimorgans of DNA with the unknown sample. Not a close relative, but enough to suggest a third cousin or a great-great-aunt. The analyst began piecing together family trees, tracing branches from the match through birth records, marriage licenses, and old census sheets. Each step mapped the spread of a family across Colorado and the Midwest, narrowing the field to a handful of living descendants who would have been adults in 1987. The process required patience and precision. Every assumption had to be checked, every potential connection verified against public records and law enforcement databases. Privacy remained a constant concern. Only profiles that had opted in for law enforcement matching were used, and the analyst worked within boundaries set by state law and database policy. No one outside the investigative team knew the search was underway. As the family tree took shape, one name kept resurfacing. It was a man in his 60s, living just 2 counties away, with a history of passing through Douglas County in the late 1980s. Investigators obtained a warrant for a confirmatory DNA sample, collecting a buccal swab under court order. The swab was rushed to the lab for direct comparison. The result was definitive. The DNA from the evidence preserved in 1987 matched the reference sample at every tested marker. The arrest came quietly. The genealogy analyst, who had spent weeks assembling the digital puzzle, joined the team as they briefed the district attorney. For the victim's family, the news brought a measure of relief and a host of new questions. Law enforcement emphasized that the match was only possible because the original evidence had been preserved, and because strict privacy protocols governed every step of the genetic search. The case closed with a modern tool, but it rested on decades of careful stewardship and on a commitment to balancing investigative need with the rights of those whose DNA had helped solve the mystery. Every year, forensic breakthroughs help solve cases once thought impossible. Today, more than 250,000 cold cases remain open in the U.S., and each new tool brings hope to families still waiting for answers. Justice is not just about the past. It is about what science makes possible now. The truth leaves a trace. Sometimes it just takes time to find it. Share your thoughts on how technology is shaping justice today.